today. If you are going to be making comments on social media, etc., please do just make sure that your phone is on silent so that it's not ringing throughout the day. Is that okay? We'll have another reminder in a little while. We'll get started in a few minutes, like I say. We have got the most amazing program for you today. I'm scared. And I don't say that very often, so I'll see you in a little while.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this kind of rainy Wednesday morning. We're so excited to be launching the October Dialogues, the first of the October Dialogues, and the Black Lives Matter conference here at Nottingham Contemporary today. My name's Jana, and I'm very happy to welcome you here. For those who haven't been to Nottingham Contemporary before, it's a fairly young institution, and within its relatively short history, there have been a recurrence of certain issues within the exhibition and public programs here. And one of these involves working with histories of anti-racism and civil rights, and we've done this through exhibitions, including works and events from former members of the Black Panther Party, engagements with histories of slavery in the city of Nottingham, and currently upstairs with an exhibition by the late civil rights movement activist, artist, and musician Sun Ra, which I encourage you to go up and see if you have a chance during the intermissions or during the lunch break. These engagements, while aimed at producing wider spread public education, if not connected to movements on the ground, run the risk of the kind of symbolic and spectacular association that has become all too common in the art world. The risk of representing politics far from and without directly engaging with them in the here and now. It's for this reason that I'm so happy that our collaborators from the UK, from Bright Ideas Nottingham, from the Nottingham Can't Breathe campaign, from the monitoring group, and from the Centre for Research into Race and Rights at the University of Nottingham have come together to think of a way to engage in what is both an exchange of ideas, but also a call to action. So we're really, really thrilled to have this day together, which is a kind of marathon day, really, where we start now and go until essentially 10 tonight. But also, I wanted to mention the things that have happened in advance and will happen after this event, because I think sometimes we can get caught up in the events and not think about their legacies. So I wanted to mention the event that we had last night and to thank the participants who launched this really amazing newspaper, which is a collaboration between young people who are part of the Chatbout collective here in Nottingham who work on issues of policing, and also with young people and artists from London under the name Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable, working with the artist Barbara Asante. And we had a really great beginning, I think, of this conversation in a pretty informal setting last night. And tomorrow there will be an activist workshop from 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock where everybody, or 10 till 1, where we'll all come back together, or those of you who can will come back together and also think about how this conference and its ideas might produce particular actions in the UK, in Europe, and in Nottingham. So I just wanted to really say a huge thank you to the collaborators at all of the organizations who worked amazingly to produce today. And you will meet now Zoe from the Centre for Research in Race and Rights. You'll meet Lisa Robertson from Bright Ideas Nottingham, and later today you'll meet Jagdish Patel from the monitoring group. And they and all of their teams have been really outstanding in working together and putting this day together. So I'm going to hand over to Zoe, and I just wanted to say, please feel welcome here. There's going to be kind of a lot of people in the building, so if things kind of are a bit clunky at times, just come and let me know, or other people who are involved in the conference wearing these lovely t-shirts. Yes, and we'll do our best to make everything run as smoothly as we possibly can. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm Zoe. I just want to say a couple of words really quickly on behalf of the Centre for Research in Race and Rights. I think about what our hopes and what our aims are for today. We believe in scholar activism. We believe that scholars and researchers do have a role to play in social justice. We remember always that the Black Panthers started with a study group, and that throughout their history, intellectual production and research was really key to how they developed new forms of social action. It's really steeped in a tradition of intellectual engagement as political praxis. So we believe that scholars and researchers need to work with local activist groups, need to develop tools for recovering a sort of activist history, the historical precedent that helps us understand both the current forms of repression, but also of resistance. And so we are at this centre activist scholars working on the history and literature and art and music and sociology and politics of social justice, believing that there is a usable past for contemporary social justice, that this Black Lives Matter movement has not come out of nowhere, that it has a deep heritage in both the US and the UK, that there is no such thing as activist discontinuity, that there is such a thing as protest memory, memory of protest used for protest, that it's not just the conservatives who have a hold on tradition. Really just that protest movements are at their best when they look backwards to move forward, when they can borrow and adapt the tactics and rhetoric and visual culture, the activist lessons of the past, you know, from the first uprisings of enslaved people on board slave ships on plantations, through the anti-slavery, anti-lynching, anti-racist, desegregationist, black power, black feminist, prison abolition, protest movements of the last 200 years of a long freedom struggle, this hard, often hugely successful, often crushed, long 200-year freedom struggle on the part of the black diaspora. And I think as scholar activists, as historians, as theorists of this movement, we might have a role to play in contemporary social justice, in being part of this movement that is activist-led, but academically supported. And so as a historian, I could outline for you now the origin point of the Black Lives Matter movement, where it begins, I think, and it would be a really long lecture, and it might begin with the Haitian Revolution. It might pause at the armed uprisings of Nathaniel Turner and Madison, Washington. It might pause at the protest movements led by Ida B. Wells, Marcus Garvey, Du Bois in the early 20th century, and stop at the Black Power era on both sides of the Atlantic in the mid to late 20th century. Because activists have been saying for centuries, Black Lives Matter. It was white abolitionists who circulated this popular but problematic image in the 18th century of a crouching, pleading slave asking, "Am I not a man and a brother?" But for the last 200 years, black activists and protest writers and artists have not just answered, but transformed that question. The leading black abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who made several trips to the UK and spoke to audiences here in the 19th century, he said that when he posed for photographs like this, became the most photographed American, actually, of the whole 19th century, with a clenched fist, with folded arms, replacing the pleading hands of that image which he castigated with his own clenched fist. It was his own statement, Black Lives Matter. The same statement made 100 years later at the funeral of Emmett Till in 1955 by Emmett Till's mother, who insisted on an open casket so that the world could see what the lynchers had done to her 14-year-old son and know that his life and his death mattered. The same statement made in 1968 in Memphis when activists turned that question, "Am I not a man?" into a statement, "I am a man," with these banners. When Black Power turned those pleading hands of that original icon into a power fist on the podium at the 1968 Olympics, and by the Panthers with their iconic symbol, the power salute, the figure of that original anti-slavery icon standing up. The slogan then, Black Lives Matter, you know, it might not have actually circulated as a slogan until the last 2 years, but it's been at the heart of this long freedom struggle on both sides of the Atlantic. And so when 3 black feminists and seasoned organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, 2 of whom identify as queer, one is a daughter of Nigerian immigrants, when they harnessed what began as a social media hashtag and turned it into an activist network in 2013, it resonated, I think, not just because of the high-profile deaths of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and others, but also because it recalls this protest heritage, this deep protest memory. I also think, of course, just narrowing in a bit in this historical story, we might also trace the origins of just this particular phase of the freedom struggle, the phase we're in now, maybe back to at least 2005, just over 10 years ago, in New Orleans. It was clear from the government response to Hurricane Katrina that black lives might not matter. Certainly back to July 2013, when a jury agreed for 4 hours, as though his black life did not matter, and the killing in Ferguson sparked up yet again the white police officer. Last year as well, when Eric Garner repeated "I can't breathe" 11 times while lying face down in a police officer's illegal chokehold, and his black life didn't matter. Not then, and not when a jury decided, again, not to indict the white police officer. And so in response, since August 2014, there have been over 1,000 protest actions in the name of Black Lives Matter. A new generation of protest music has come forth. The first US national convening in July of this year had over 1,000 participants. The Black Lives Matter organization freedom rides brought 600 people from 18 cities across the US. The activist group We the Protesters, based in Ferguson, has released a really widely circulated manifesto with 10 detailed policy points at its website, Campaign Zero. So we've witnessed this creative, this consistent, this confident, just mosaic of struggle. New generation of activists against state-sanctioned violence. It's a leader-full, not a leaderless movement. It's a turning point. It's a new collective memory. Solidarity action just across the world, from Brazil to India, across Europe to regular actions here in Paris, but in London, Amsterdam, Berlin, the occupation of a London shopping centre last December in which 600 protesters participated. And these are actions that go beyond solidarity with Black Americans. This is part of a movement to end racist policing in Europe. And I'm sure that this, perhaps here in Nottingham today or tomorrow, might result in the formation of a chapter of Black Lives Matter, the first in Europe, joining the 30 that exist in the US, Canada and Garner. This is the global activism that we're talking about today that carries on the goals of this long civil rights movement of the last 2 centuries. It's also a new phase in that struggle with the forces of the last 50 years that have curtailed the progress of that civil rights movement. It's an activism, I think, that tells us, not just that Black Lives matter, but that resistance matters and that it always has mattered. Thank you, Lisa.
I can't breathe. There's been many times in my life where I've thought those words to myself. I was an athlete when I was younger, and I used to run for Not Say See all over the country. And I gave it my all. And at the end of that race, I could hardly breathe. Could hardly breathe. Felt good. I've been so in love to the extent where my heart is just bursting, and I think, I can never live without this person. It's just totally taken my breath away. I stood at the side of the Victoria Falls. The Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, with my 4-year-old son on my back. I couldn't breathe. The beauty. Has anybody ever been to Victoria Falls? Yeah. The rainbows, the rain like it is today, and the sunshine together, just creating the most beautiful, beautiful rainbows. It takes your breath away. But those 3 words took on a whole new meaning last year. They took on a whole new meaning, and they'll never mean the same again. I'll never use those words again in that same way. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how today's event has come about, for me anyway, the context. And people will come from it from many different paradigms, I suppose. Has anyone seen the Black Panthers movie yet? Yep. I've got Victoria showing me, Dr. Victoria showing me here in a turtleneck. It's not black, but there's nothing wrong with a turtleneck. I nearly turned up today, the black turtleneck, the shades, the beret. I've got an afro. Boy, have I got an afro, I've got an afro to kill. But it starts off, and basically, it starts off where there's a group of blind people feeling an elephant. The world, what they think this elephant is. And I suppose the point is, if you feel an elephant's or if you feel its skin, yet another thing again. So the Black Lives Matter movement is many things to many people. And that's what we're going to see today through the panels. But I can tell you only about our journey at Bright Ideas Nottingham and how we've come to be standing here today. So last December, I had a number of conversations, and one of them was with Professor Zoe Trott. Zoe and I were in the Broadway cinema just down the road from here. And Zoe has taught for many years and said, well, bed of activism in Nottingham. Is it at the Akala Centre? I went down, you know, and I sort of dropped my head a little bit. And she said, why isn't anything happening? Where are all the die-in protests? Why isn't anything happening in response to these very public displays of police brutality? Why is nothing happening in this city? I don't understand. And I had another conversation with a woman called Andrea Birch. She's not here, she's not able to make it today, but she's from the Workers' Educational Association. You know, she had a group of Nottingham, and I showed them the Eric Garner footage, where, you know, he was repeating, "I can't breathe." And I said, you know, do you think we should be doing something about this? And they were like, yeah, we should. And there are people here, Charles and Clive and other people here from the Slave Trade Legacies group. And again, you know, those conversations, why isn't something happening? And I guess those conversations were happening in other places in Nottingham, not just at Bright Ideas Nottingham, but in places. And short of it is that we organised the Nottingham Can't Breathe protest at the Victoria Centre. What we decided to be, where's Peter? Peter Ling, where are you, Peter? There's Peter, Professor Peter Ling from Nottingham University. Later, a few months down the line, Peter was to basically do a presentation that I went to see, and he talked about what grassroots activism looks like on its best day. And I was very pleased to say that we sort of ticked all the boxes, didn't we, Peter? Without even knowing it, because what we did is we took what we knew, what we'd seen, and we tried to think what is going to work for us in a Nottingham context. And in the words of Zoe Trod, we took the usable past. Instead of just trying to make something up, we said, right, what do we know will work in this context? What don't we want to happen? And what can we feasibly do? Giving ourselves about a week to actually organise this thing. So we decided to keep it small and manageable. We were able to resource it. We used ladder organisation without even knowing we were using ladder organisation. And we just basically got 10 people who we knew were really committed to this agenda and asked them to bring 10 people along. We didn't want a mass protest. We didn't want people turning up not knowing what they're doing in mayhem, because we decided to do it on the busiest shopping day of the year at Victoria Centre, which is a private property. So it's actually illegal to actually protest in a space like that. Now, bearing in mind, I think a week or so before, not very long before, Westfield Shopping Centre had a similar protest, and it was organised by London Black Revs, and they had hundreds of people going down to that protest. Unfortunately, it resulted in a number of arrests. Can anyone remember how many? Was it 76 arrests? And of course it made the press all over the place, because don't the press just love it when they can report on violence and, you know, arrests and what have you. I mean, I suspect what happened in the Westfield protest was that because people were coming down to that protest at different times, the security in the shopping centre started to panic. They closed off the exits and entrances. They actually separated protesters from each other. And if you can imagine, when you go into a protest, for those of you who have been to a protest, your adrenaline is high. You know, you've been looking forward to this protest for how long? I know how high the adrenaline goes, because I know how high it was before our protest. And so you're going down, you're determined to get to this protest, you're looking forward to it, because this is something you're really passionate about, but then you're met by closed doors and security guards and people telling you to go away. You can imagine that non-violent people will actually raise their voices, demand to be let in with the other protesters and whatever, and all sorts of things happen from there. We didn't want that to happen in Nottingham. We wanted something that was short and sweet and manageable and left people going home safely to their beds, not locked up in, you know, in a prison cell, which actually wouldn't achieve anything for the Nottingham protest. So we asked people to meet up at a certain time. We said that basically what would happen was that the men and children would lie down in the middle, and the women would form a protective circle around the men. Now, that has got connotations, and it was quite contentious to do that. You know, some of the feminists were sort of saying, you know, and I am a feminist, but some feminists were saying, oh, you know, why did that happen? Women have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality as well. Of course they have. But it was for a very practical reason, because we knew if anything did happen, that people would be more reluctant to actually manhandle, for want of a better word, women around that circle than the men. However, as we've got some people shaking their head, not necessarily the case. Not necessarily the case. We get it. And some of the black women, and Rastarella is here, and she said to herself, you know something, I'm lying down. So people, at the end of the day, did what they needed to do, and that was fine. But when you organise a protest, you have to let people know that it is organised, and people have to feel safe coming down. And when people think, oh, yes, that sounds like a plan, I feel safe doing that, that was the key to the practical arrangements of the protest. At the end of the day, people did what they want. And as you see from the picture, there was a little girl in a red coat that decided she was just going to stand up in the middle of all the people lying down, and she was taking photos of those people lying down. There she is. Very reminiscent of the little boy that became the iconic, one of the icons of Ferguson. Oh, there he is. There he is with his little red hat. You know, those little magic moments, you can't make them up. In that week before the protest, a group of young artists, Chris Riss, Two Tone, and Jardigger, were tasked with the, were given the task of making a protest track. And they went away, they worked at CRS Studios, and I remember on the Wednesday, they went away to write something, and I got a message through saying, no, nothing's happened. And Thursday morning, it was like, no, we haven't got anything. I was like, what? Not even, I haven't got a piece of music, nothing. I was like, okay. Thursday, they went away. I think it was 6:30 that Chris Riss went off to studio to meet the others. And about 11 o'clock that night, a little text came through, and it said, it's coming together. My heart just lifted. It's coming together. Another little text came through an hour later. Jardigger has laid down his bit of the track. And so the text came. And then the next day, the Friday, and bearing in mind the protest was on the Saturday, on the Friday evening, I heard one of the most amazing tracks I'll ever hear in my life. And I say that because it's where it's come from, the creativity, the talent that went into that, the feeling that went into that track. I don't know if we're going to have time to play it sometime today. I know we're going to be playing it this evening, but I hope at some point during the day you'll hear that track. So the idea is that we'd play the track, people would lie down to the track, 3 minutes, and literally then peacefully disperse after the protest. So it was a really short protest, 3 minutes. A very powerful protest. Christine Bell, who'll be here joining us later on today from 97.5 Kemet FM, was actually on the balcony. So you see there's a big circle of people around the balcony, then there's a circle of women there, and then, the people lying in the middle. Up on that balcony somewhere was Christine Bell, and she was reporting live from the protest, which went out to thousands of listeners, basically, taking people through what was happening with the protest. So other people, got to hear what was happening and join in that day in a safe way, but a very powerful, powerful way. So that track got played all over Kemet FM, and you can listen to it on YouTube. So it's one of the legacies of the Nottingham protest. Other things have happened since then. I'm not going to go into loads and loads of detail, but Bo from the New Art Exchange, who I know is here somewhere, has facilitated. Is that you? Where are you, Bo? Oh, there she is. There's Bo. Facilitated a number of sessions at the New Art Exchange called Get Up, Stand Up, which some of you, I know saw some of you at some of those talks. And one of those, we did look at the history of protest movement and social justice movements, and as I say, Peter was sort of like laying down to us what effective protest can look like. And we've also got a Facebook, a closed or secret Facebook group, some of you. And I tell you what, there's a piece of research there for the academics that are here today. The amount of material that people have gathered in that Facebook group to do with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything related to it is amazing, and can show you the power of social media. Marissa, who's on, where's Marissa? Where's she? There she is. There's Marissa. Marissa, aka Christmas, is part of the Bright Ideas team, and she said something really, really powerful to me the other day. She said, because we're talking about, I don't know if people saw those pictures of the Million Man March this year. Amazing, so uplifting to see those things on mainstream media if they covered it. But the mainstream media don't want us to feel uplifted. It's too positive a thing to put on mainstream media. But she said, oh, not to worry, Lisa. We have the mass media in our hands because we have our phones. That's what she said to me. I thought, she's right. We have the mass media in our hands because we have our phones. And, social media is changing the face of protest movement today. It is giving people access where maybe they haven't had access before. And that's another reason why I will implore you to, if you are on Twitter, to use that hashtag today, Black Lives Matter UK, and use social media. Do your little bit. Because this today and the Black Lives Matter movement is not about necessarily what we do as individuals. It is, of course it is, and we can all do our little bit. But together, that collective movement, that's what will force change. That's how we will see change in the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not going to say much more than that, really. Apart from, this morning I got off and there was a little moment where I couldn't breathe. But it was all for good reasons, because I anticipated today, it's going to be a good day. We are here to uplift each other, where we are here to support each other. Somebody in distress, or see somebody hurting, see somebody sitting on their own and could do with a smile, or whatever it is, create today. There are going to be some tough conversations today. There are challenges, but I will trust we will do that with the best heart and spirit and with the best intention. Important to have it is. Not difficult, but let's here today. Let's check why we've come today. And remember that we've all come for the same thing, which is, Black lives. And I just want to say, it probably won't be the last time you hear from me today, but I won't be nearly as long on this microphone. And I am going to hand you over now to somebody I've known for years. We set this group years ago called Sisters of Nia. It's when I first came back to Nottingham. I'm a Nottingham girl. And we set up this little group. There's five sisters. We set up this group called Sisters of Nia, and we were sort of like, yeah, we're going to do a bit. We're going to challenge the system and all the rest of it. And since then, I've known this woman, and I still know her today. We don't do Sisters of Nia anymore, but we've moved on, and I think we will go on to do some fabulous things together. To people in Nottingham, she will need introduction, but I know not everyone is from Nottingham. Can I invite up to the stage Michelle Mother Hubbard? Come on, people.
Switched on now, is it? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Lisa, for that kind introduction. Yes, it's been lovely doing work and being involved with things with Lisa. The themes of the events and things we've worked on, they come along to Drop, which is a spoken word monthly event, and we have different themes, of which we've had I Can't Breathe and Black Lives Matter and lots of other different things. It happens on the first Thursday of each month. Come and ask me about it if you want to know any more. So, privileged to have been asked to write a piece for this event, so I'm going to share it with you. It's called Black Lives, and then in brackets, Should Matter. I just want to add as well, I always get nervous before performances, and I think it's a good thing. But I take time out every morning when I wake up, because that's one of the things of being self-employed when you don't have a lot of work, is you can meditate and you can pray. And I was thinking about today, and so I know it's not part of the poem, but I just wanted to add to you, that I asked the ancestors, for guidance and for permission to speak today. And as I was sitting in my meditation and my prayers this morning, realised, actually, that's, I'm not just talking ancestors through slavery. I was thinking of the lives of some of the people that have already been mentioned, which includes children and our young people that have been lost, to the police on the streets, even just within the last 3 years. So I've asked them for permission to speak, so I'm hoping they guide me. Excuse me, please. We need justice. We need peace. We need uncorrupt police. Then there'd be no need for I can't breathe. Black blood secretes onto concrete streets that are tarred and feathered with racial hatred. Invisible nooses are proudly erected. Please, Mr. Officer, don't shoot. But the branches and the roots of this institution are nourished on corruption. This officer loves the sound of emptying out a round into another black brother as he falls to the ground. One more pound of flesh, one more black death. Are we supposed to honour those with more and more vigils round a lamppost? Black suits, black dress, as we lay a black community member to rest. Mums wishing we could dress our sons in bulletproof vests. I'm not ready to lay my children to rest. There's strength in numbers if we're prepared to invest. Invest our voices. Invest our time. We must put an end to this structural crime. Don't allow them to gag us with their all lives matter. Because if all lives matter, then we wouldn't be at a crossroads in history. We may not still be locked down in slavery, but we're not free to be the things we want to be. So don't tell me all lives matter. All lives should matter. But as a matter of fact, your life doesn't matter if you're black. Can you believe that? As my son would say, the po-po, the feds, Babylon, police, they don't give a if we can't breathe. It's a racist institution, part of the problem, not the solution. All lives matter? Really? If all lives matter, then why are graveyards getting fatter with a continuous conveyor belt of black candles police have snubbed out? Another precious black life ended by a uniformed thug that won't even get suspended. Another stop and search on an innocent brother leaving church, now lying lifeless, face down in the dirt. Do you hashtag Black Lives Matter? Or do you remove the hashtag and replace it with a swastika as you ignorantly splutter all lives matter? Would you troll on social media on a cancer awareness campaign saying all illnesses matter? Yeah, I'll ask you that again. Would you troll on social media on a cancer awareness campaign saying all illnesses matter? What? Thought not. Uptown, downtown, black lives gunned down, northwest, southeast, another black brother murdered by the police, another black woman that won't be believed as she screams, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. So she's sectioned, medicated, incarcerated, murdered and cremated. And you wonder why we're so full of hatred. Don't get it twisted. You don't need to fear sagging jeans, bandanas and trainers. You should be fearing uniforms, badges and tasers. The most dangerous gangs on the street are the uniformed haters patrolling the beat. And it's as clear as black and white. White cops snub out black lives, leaving damaged, angry communities. But now we're uprising, and can they handle this? There's no such thing as justice or emancipation, not once they've got us down at the station, where they treat us with prejudice, hate and discrimination, raping us with their stop and search, shackling us with their handcuffs, whipping us with unjust sentences, hanging us from their nooses with the way they portray us in the news. Media filling white minds with hatred and fear. See, people cross the road when we come near. 400 years of slavery, and it seems we've gone backwards in time. Enslavement of the mind, and you tell us to let go and move on? Let go and move on? Really? Cameron, you moron. Tell that to the families of Trayvon. Tell that to the family of Michael Brown as you dance around. Tell that to the family of Tamir Rice if you think that sounds nice. Tell that to the families of Sandra Bland so they can understand. Tell that to the global black community. And of course, tell that to the Jews that suffered the Holocaust. If it's happening in the USA today, we better speak up now because it's heading our way. Today, we're stepping backwards into the dark parts of history, back to the future like back to slavery. They're lynching our liberty. We've never been treated as innocent, only guilty. Blacks receive the death sentence, or a life sentence, for crime whites don't deserve sentence for. And the philosophy of superiority created for. And as Bob Marley would say, get up, stand up for our rights. Get up, stand up for our rights. What's the matter? I'll tell you what's the matter. Black lives. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. And on the final line, I just want you to say that with me, please, as loud as we can. Black lives matter. Thank you.
We're going to go right into panel one. So just while we invite our panelists to come up and take their seats and invite Timo to come find the multimedia, we thought we might introduce you to our chairs, who are actually really exciting people in of themselves.
Okay, so our first chair is Dr. Champa Patel. She's the campaigns director at Amnesty International. She oversees global teams working on global campaigns, individuals at risk, human rights defenders, crisis, and tactical work and activism in youth. She has a background in public health and outreach projects, focusing on clinical and support services for refugees, asylum seekers, and trafficked individuals. She obtained a PhD from the University of Nottingham in 2004 and has, over the last 2 decades, served on the board of various charity and community groups, particularly within the anti-racism and community development sector.
And I'm going to introduce her now because we'll go right into the to panel 2 after a break, but we're also very excited to have chairing our second panel, Dr. Victoria Shoumni. She's a lecturer in education at UCL Institute of Education London, and her research and expertise are in gender and identity and race and class. She just completed a funded project called Black Girls' Wellbeing, and her current research focuses on identity and leadership. She's a co-convener of the Belmas Gender and Leadership Research Interest Group. She's a member of the Runnymede Trust 360, which is this national network connecting leaders in race equality around new thinking and debates and social change. She's a lead mentor for the BAME Women Race to the Top Mentoring Circle, supporting women civil servants who want to move forward in their careers. So that's just to really flag up for you. We're very excited about that we have today, and we'll be introducing the 2 afternoon chairs to you after lunch. But for now, we're going to hand over to our first panel. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? So it's a real pleasure to be able to kick off proceedings today. As Lisa was saying, I work with Amnesty International, and we sent human rights observers to Baltimore and Ferguson in order to document the violations that were happening. So the session this morning is really looking at the themes that resonate internationally from that movement, such as police brutality, excessive use of force, police accountability, and the increasing privatization of violence that we see. So, for example, within the UK, the death of Jimmy Mobenga by GFS security guards. So these are themes that resonate across borders. They are activism cultures, communities, organizing models that are influenced by each other. So as a sideways digression, I was in Hong Kong meeting the leaders of the Yellow Umbrella protest movement. And I was saying to them, what is it that inspired you and your tactics? Because, you know, in Hong Kong, activism is seen as more passive. And they were saying that they were hugely inspired and influenced in their tactics by the Black Lives Matter movement to show the reach of this movement outside of its borders and how it's influencing different communities who are all experiencing this particular issue around excessive use of force by forces. So our panelists today are going to speak to the international dimensions of this movement. We've got Khadija with us here to say, Karen Salt, and Joshua, who's been able to join us. He had a hideous journey this morning. So we're glad that you're here. So without any ado, if you all very accomplished and fantastic speakers, the biographies are there, but we're going to get straight into the meat of the issues. So I'm going to hand over to Khadija now.
Okay, thanks. Which one do you want first? Akala, let me choose. Is that the video? Yes. The poem is by Audre Lorde.
Good morning, everybody. You're so brave to be here. This time in the morning with this horrible weather. Oh my gosh, so thank you for being here.
It's all God's weather.
Really? Okay.
Rain is the least of our problems.
Okay. Right, so I'm speaking on, the title of mine was Black, Bitter and Beautiful, the Role of Poets in Human Rights Campaigns. And I'm not a very techie person, but I'm going to try. But if something doesn't work, we're just going to move straight on. We can find it online later, okay? So I started off by thinking when there's a call for justice, invariably there is a call to poets for their voices and support. So I'm going to just discuss a little bit what role do poets play and what power does poetry have. So here we go with this first one. I'm just going to play a minute of this. I did an event in February at Goldsmiths University, and it was in support of what Black Poets Speak Out were doing to support Black Lives Matter in the States. So even though they had people in various states doing these videos, we did some in the UK as well. And what they wanted to do is that poets weren't allowed to read their own poems. They had to read somebody else's poem, because what this was is you're not promoting yourself as a poet. You are, you know, giving out these words of poetry in support of the cause. So I'm just going to play a minute of this one.
The poem is by Audre. The poem is by
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Don't worry, we'll kind of look.
Great poet. I couldn't follow that.
Poetry have the power to change people's minds, hearts and souls. I agree that one-on-one poetry must be taken seriously as a tool for change. That also means, whether they want to or not, I believe that poets have a responsibility to consider what they say, how they say, the audience. Poets often may have to take a bigger step and not just do the work on stage, but do it on public, on the ground and out of the spotlight. So the stage is where it often begins, and I'm glad to say that most of the, and who expect and gladly take on the role of communicator. Can you do that for me? Thanks. In February 2015, I organised the first Black, Bitter and Beautiful Poetry Getty event at Goldsmiths University. I called the series She Speaks of Our Survival. The early one did this series in the 90s, a restaurant called Pamela's in Dorset in London. Lioness Chant and Brother Resistance. And the feedback from the audience we got from this event in February was very clear. Appreciated it as being informative, enlightening, and educational, and more information was called for, particularly on police brutality and deaths in custody in the UK. The audience presented to the post. I mean, it's just ironic that 2 months later, after I did this event, my own cousin, on the May the 3rd, lost his life due to plea in England, hence the T-shirt. All we did at this event was generic guide when and where, and some stats regarding this custody, awareness, providing information. Just that information wasn't enough. People wanted more. Could we or should we have done more? It seems that these were situations also that many of the audience hadn't heard of or realised that these situations were occurring in the UK. And so, for example, the phrase of "I can't breathe," they'd only heard that associated with Eric Garner. They hadn't heard of it being associated with, 6 months after that, the security guards being let off about killing Jimmy Mugabe, who also in 2010. So is the role of poets of bridging information and educational gap between continents and countries useful? I think there is a role for them to play here, as I do believe that part of that reason about Jimmy was, of course, the way he was portrayed in the media, using that I word, immigrant, as if they have less rights. And I think we always have to be careful of language. I'm big on language, and be careful that we people go to Africa, people come here, but now acceptable. So this was similar for for the case of my cousin Sheku Bayo, and the difference there again. The commission weren't they intervening is different. So people weren't aware of the situation, and like we realised it was a test case that this happened because the police in Scotland didn't have to give statements to what had happened. We first of all thought at the time. So we were just finding out all of these things, and we have to kind of think, where can things like poetry have a role to play in making people understand and be educated about this? And it also raises other thoughts about the rights of not just the victims, and the victims have gone, but the victims' families. So, for example, there is some other talk coming out about things like about excited delirium, and people ask about what is that. And I think that in some ways, poets can take words and phrases and use them to talk about them more in their work, and so that people have an understanding on different levels about this. So I'm now going to go back to first thing I was going to show you, because I do have to refer to it again at the end, so thank you. So I'm just going to show a minute of this.
My name is Akala Richards. I am a black poet. I will not remain silent while black people are being murdered in the US and abroad. I have a right to be angry. Power. The difference between poetry and rhetoric is being ready to kill yourself instead of your children. I am trapped on a desert of raw gunshot wounds and a dead child dragging his shattered black face off the edge of my sleep. Blood from his punctured cheeks and shoulders is the only liquid for miles. And my stomach churns at the imagined taste while my mouth splits into dry lips without loyalty or reason.
Just to show you a clip of the whole series of things we were doing for that. The other one I wanted to show you was around Aleem Kamara. Aleem Kamara did a spoken word thing for Sheku Bio. So I want to put it on a little bit further down. Yeah, just tell you that for a second. So this is just listening to a little bit of what he did. I was hoping to get the hands up bit because I wanted people to listen to him doing the hands up. Okay, just put it.
Pepper sprays and CS as well.
It's okay.
Hands up.
Yeah.
You need to get your hands up. Hands up. You need to get your hands up. Sheku was pronounced dead around 9 a.m. after one secret police meeting, 2 CIDs were amended. A member of the public found.
I just wanted to show that little bit of clip again because we were talking about hands up earlier. And again, we're using that whole thing in poetry as well, the way he's using the hands up like this and using the hands up like this. So not only our words, but just in terms of the way we're using our bodies and the hands is also important. And then, of course, that is what we're using for Sheku for people to hear about his story as well. So how do we bridge the education gap in institutions, on the street, and online? What Aleem has done has been able to attract a few hundred people in a very short space of time on YouTube. And one of the things that I've learned from this and just some of the other work I'm doing, that when people want to know about something, I mean, I use, things like the video and I'm going online for research, but other people, if they want to get some information, they go straight and have a look and see what's on video. So the video now we're reeling is very important for things even like this and in terms of spoken word. That's as well why I wanted to show that and why we're realizing that this video is very important to educate people around what happened. Poetry is not just being used for the strongly emotive issues such as police and brutality issues. It's also being used for linking people with science and in terms of things like human security and environmental justice as well. And so because people's rights are changing in environmental situations. So we'll have groups such as virtual migrants that people may have heard of, who are highlighting climate change and migration and forced displacement. And they link with, for example, they've done a lot of work around highlighting the work of Chico Mendes and the work he did with the Brazilian rainforest that led to him being assassinated in 1988. So we've also got to remember people are going out there doing activism work and they're also being brutalized, so we've got to remember that as well. I personally became involved through my work with PEN and African Writers Abroad about 10 years ago with the Remember Sarawira campaign and published a poetry anthology called Dance the Guns to Silence, 100 Pens for Ken Sarawira. And it's literally 100 poets from around the world. And why that was important to me, we were talking as well last night, things came up about white liberals. Yes, I went to a meeting around Remember Sarawira, and all the good and the great organizations were there, and there was like, out of 20, there was about 3 black people in the room. One was Ken's son, one was somebody from the mayor's office, and then there was me. So I immediately rang up a friend of mine, who was a publisher, and I kind of said, we've got to do something, and we've got to do something permanent. And which I think is why he runs away from me now. But, we did this book, 100 Poets for Ken. And we had poets from all over the world, some well-known poets and some not, just getting involved with this, and it was great. And one of the poets I think who does a lot of work at the moment around environmental issues is Simon Murray. I'm going to hash you very quickly because I know I'm running out of time. Can I have the plaque? Thanks, just the plaque. Forget that, just the plaque. Another project that I did do in terms of using the poetry, because you can also use it for commemorating past injustices. And I was involved with a project that started with a commemoration of the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade. And I have to remember, it's the commemoration of it. It was not a celebration, it was a commemoration. And that was funded by the Arts Council, and we did a project up to in Yorkshire with 6 poets and 2 visual artists. So although it's to promote artists in Yorkshire, they all said they wanted to do something again that was permanent in the community to come out of this. And it resulted in the early involvement of the setting up of the David Oluwole Memorial Association that my colleague is going to talk, she's going to talk some more about that. But we were involved in the very early stages, and we created this plaque that is on is in Chapeltown Road it's on Chapeltown Road in the, near the old library. And that's where David Oluwole used to walk up and down on that road. And so all the poets, there was a poet who gave each line, and there was one of the artists who designed it, because we wanted everybody to be involved in it. And at least one of the poets is on the committee, still on the committee now, who's Cy Murray. The other poet was Romney Smith. So this is when we say that writers do have a responsibility, as we are asking them to take on the role of teacher and a community activist. And if they teach the wrong thing, and obviously quote the wrong thing, then that can be doing more harm than good. So how can our voices reach further? I'm just going to run through my little list here. Conferences, as we are doing now, it's such a breath of fresh air when you're getting academic institutions being involved with the community, with the public. It's just essential. Workshops with the public. Would it be useful if there was an attached poet at major events to put across the world to people in different ways? Teaming with musicians and human rights organizations, should we urge human rights organizations to use poets more, not only when outraged, but also as an educational tool, and with things like climate change with organizations like Platform and Virtual Migrants. For myself, even though I'm involved with poetry, it makes me go out and listen to new and younger poets and their voices to find out what they're doing and to find out what their interests are. Radical bookshops. I know you've got a great bookshop here in Nottingham, 5 Leaves, which I'm going to be doing an event at next week, so please come. On the 2nd of November. They've got the Bread and Roses Festival. New Beacon Books in London was started by John LaRose, and he had this dream to change the world. He was a poet as well, but his whole work was around activism all the time on the streets. I could mention just a few of the poets in history I'm sure a lot of you know about. Again, I'll put my paper up online. But the new young poet of London, new young poet laureate of London is Selina Nwulu. She's very much of an activist, so please check her out. So it's good when we have a poet like this being nominated as a young poet laureate. So I'm just going to stop there. I've mentioned a few names that I think you should check out. So thank you very much for your time, patience. I'm going to end with one last phrase. Again, going back to Audre Lorde, poetry is not a luxury. Thank you.
Okay. This is not me.
Oh, you're first. Oh, I thought Joshua was first. Sorry.
There it is. I can pass that in. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I will go ahead and get started. I want to thank the organizers for gathering all of us together, and essentially thank all of you for braving a lot of things, actually. In some ways, it could be the weather, but it also is, I think, the times and the pressures and the politics and the difficulties of doing this work. And I have kind of 3 acts for this talk today, and I'm hoping I can get through each of the acts. And the graphic that you see here, that is David Oluwole, and it's coming from the West Yorkshire Playhouse. It says at the bottom, the visual prepared for the play that essentially was produced in 2009, adapted from Kester Aspen's book. I was very moved by looking at the sort of aggregation of images that appear here. And I was definitely quite motivated to start to think about the houndings of all of this It looks like it's just a visual pictorial representation that can be attached to a play, and then you're supposed to come in, you're supposed to look at it. But actually, this is an individual who will be hounded, not just to his death, but will be hounded routinely, systematically. And I started quite thinking about this, about being an activist. What does it mean to do activism when you are being hounded and you have hounds around you? So the talk today is really going to explore some of that, use his life and a lot of the sort of energies around understanding and memorializing his life to, I think, greatly inform this moment. And I thank Zoe for the great historiography, which I can sort of play upon at different times, because there is a moment where I talk about what does it mean to reject supplication as an activist, and what is the task, the sort of weight of that. All right, so I will move you directly into, there's a lot on this slide, so I apologize. I'm going to take you a little bit through this. Many of you will probably know about David Oluwale. You know his life, you know what his life stood for both Leeds, West Yorkshire. There are a number of you who may not have any clue. And you not only do you not know, but you also don't know the particularities. And this is just a brief sketch. Born in Nigeria, will travel to England as a stowaway in 1949. There's an interesting, I think, paper or story to think about the supposed migrant crisis right now, and Eritreans coming to parts of Europe and actually trying to play upon this time period of the late 40s and the movement of other people stowing away on ships coming to Europe. He's briefly imprisoned for this offense. Will end up essentially, once he comes out of his sort of 20-plus day stay in prison and work at a foundry, things start to sort of hit. There's a lot of contestation of whether or not he wanted to be an engineer. Did he go to school at night? And which clubs did he actually attend to? I'm going to leave that for people like Max Farr and others who are really interested in the sort of documentation of his sort of either early African life or his life in the late 40s, early 50s. But there's this moment, of course, in 53 where he's arrested. Essentially, a nightclub will be raided by the police, and he will be identified as supposedly being violent, and then will be transferred to an asylum. That will be one of a couple of different stays for his life, electroconvulsion therapy, and he will be put on significant antipsychotic medication, identified as being schizophrenic. This will forever change him. He will go back into the community. And then you see a succession of things start to happen. Multiple social support agencies rejecting him, some helping him, some not. Community members seeing him, some not. Individuals trying to reach out to him. And yet, at the same time, will be the systematic hounding from the police. Those who will round him up when he is eventually no longer able to maintain any established home and will be sleeping rough, and trying to move him along, police brutality, actual beatings, hospital stays. It's just a succession of entry and out of various different localities. And then, of course, in 1969, there will be a moment of people seeing him being chased again by the two officers who have been the most engaged in the systematic brutalization of his life. And then he will be found after this moment in the river. Many will call this murder, and actually will say that he will be pushed to his death, hounded to his death. Others will dance around this, whether or not he will eventually, are the people or not. The reality is that the hounding cannot be more from that. And many different various different activities, not necessarily the death itself in 69, but the continuation from year after year of the type of aggression that he experienced. So Act 1 of houndings. Houndings have kind of two definitions. There are actually quite a few, but these are the two that are swirling around in my head right now. And one of them is that houndings are things that hunt or chase or pursue. They don't necessarily have to do it in a systematic way, but they will be things that will be coming after something. There is another version of houndings, which are systematic, routine persecutions against particular types of people. Some will refer to those as racial acts due to people's sexuality. They could be due to their gender expression, a whole bunch of different things, but it's persecution, and it is targeted, and it is systematic. The type of work that I do, I'm really interested in the coupling of those two things. Individuals who are able to use their power positions to essentially hound individuals, to go after them systematically and routinely for a whole bunch of reasons, and actually chase them. We are talking today about particular acts of brutality or houndings, if you will, that have ended in deaths of particular people. But there are a whole bunch of different versions of these houndings that don't necessarily end in deaths, and that are part of a system of brutality that we have to actually try to figure out some way of addressing, I think, as activists. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit, not to question Lisa's push towards social media, but to try to understand that we may actually have to become digital activists and use similar or completely novel types of strategies to deal with the types of brutality that may be happening online, especially for movements who are using their online presence as a way of actually having activism. And we can't lose sight of that. So, the hounds. We've talked a little bit about the police. We've talked a bit about other forms of structures of authority. But the hounds are very, very interesting entities. They're subtle sometimes. Sometimes they have given themselves the title of being empowered, but they really aren't. They wear the guise, they wear the clothes. Maybe they are in our institutions when we see them. But I was traveling down yesterday, and I happened to go to this restaurant to eat. And there is a young black man that comes in. He sits down, and he's listening to some music. And it was perplexing to me. I had my food, and I'm actually just sat there, and I observe all the time. I'm always interested in who cleans, who cooks, who touches, who interacts. I'm interested in how people interact with these people in these spaces. It just fascinates me. And I watched this man for about 15 minutes not get served, and people walk past him. Just walk past him. There were not any evil looks, but he was invisible. Invisible. Well, you could say welcome, but that's a hounding. That is a hounding, especially if you aggregate those and actually look at them as systematic acts of brutality that are both subtle in some instances and actually will have physical and visceral problematics later on. That is a problem for me when I start to think about if it's okay for someone to be invisible in that setting, why do they become hyper-visible in others, right? So much so that they are then labeled as dangerous and receive antipsychotic medication. Right? There is a problem when we live in a world that is able to flip that switch of invisibility and hyper-invisibility and then actually be able to then rationalize their actions. And that means as a strategist, we have to get quite smart about figuring out how to challenge that. So the battle lines then become quite real for us. Lived theory, some of you might know about this, a little theoretical, is essentially just saying that you are living that theory in your experiences. The experiences right now that you are engaged in, the types of politics that you are doing, it is actually theoretical in a lot of ways, but it is based on your lived reality. You are actually using that reality to make sense of your world, right? To put the processes together to try to understand it from a systematic way, because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about systematic processes and also systematic processes of change. And to do that, we might need to spend a little time thinking about what being do we inhabit? What structures do we encounter? How do we use that knowledge collectively to target and actually try to make changes ultimately happen? But we have to think really critically about what does it mean to resist being a supplicant. Zoe mentioned the problematic aspect of the woodcut that she presented before, of the abolitionist use of the supplicating of the enslaved person beseeching someone to recognize them so that they would essentially be emancipated or freed. And this doesn't come from me. This comes from another person named Marcus Wood, who's got a fantastic book called The Horrible Gift of Freedom. And in it, when he's talking about commemorations of the Abolition Act that forgets the payment to people who lost property, Marcus talks about one of the things that happens with the supplicant and the reality of the relationship is they are actually locked together. So the moment the supplicant starts to talk in a different way without saying thank you, they are labeled dangerous, they are labeled a nuisance, they are labeled uppity, they are labeled cheeky. There is a problematic to the type of way that they are engaging in their activist work. And that's kind of interesting. Not everybody has the life experience or the particular circumstances of enslavement, even in the diaspora. But I think it's worth trying to work that out. So what does it mean to resist that? Because people will put us in that place no matter what. And it's a continuous one. Now, I won't have time to talk about racial injustice in an age of doxing, but this is what I was talking about, and doxing is essentially using various different public documents sometimes as well as illegal documents to then publicize information online about individuals. And what we've got is we've got a whole bunch of people. This will happen against Shaun King. One of the first things that is written about Shaun King in a question about his supposed paternity is going to be Black Lives Matter activists lied to Oprah and essentially is defrauding the world. I mean, this is literally what the headline popped up. And yet you start to read social media, you start to look at these various different places where people are targeted, and it is hounding. To the point where people are getting rape threats. There are people putting photographs of their children. They are documenting where people are working. There's an incredible force that's using these spaces in a way that is inherently quite dangerous. And I think as activists, we have to understand what that presence in space is and what it means to actually resist in that type of environment. Not just to use it to publicize events or to use it to broadcast information, but what does it mean when you become a target? And a target for a particular type of people who use those spaces quite dangerously. All right, so I'm gonna have to be quite quick because I'm getting my signs telling me, hurry it up. The carrying part is essentially the place where I've been dealing a lot lately with thinking about the weight of all of this. You know, we've got the past that we're carrying. We're carrying our presence right now. We are bridges. We are bridges between both of those worlds, the past that we have, the presence the futures we want to get toward. But it is a weight. You know, we don't talk a lot about what is the psychic energy expended to try to carry that. What does it mean to be hounded? What does it mean to resist these hounds that are surrounding us and not lose your own minds? Right? Not make those disagreements be stuff that forges some sense of disconnection with everything because we're either so weak or we're either so tired that we don't know how to move forward. It's a real reality of actually trying to do activist work, and we don't spend enough time talking about it. We just sort of keep moving on to the next campaign as if this stuff doesn't actually carry a weight, and it does. And the hounds are there. Right? I want all of you to see them, to not shy from them, but to see them, to note them for who they are, to not blow them up to be bigger than what they are, but to recognize that you may be making yourself a target, and that may be okay for some of you, but for others of you, that may not be. You might need to be a collective as opposed to maybe a singular, and that may be just fine. Now, there are some tensions to all of this, and this is my last slide, I promise, Zoe. There are 4 things here. The ones on the side, for those of you who are in the academy, you'll know what those are. The top one is the number of Black professors in the entire UK. The top number on the left, right there. 17 is the number of Black female professors in the UK. Yes, and that's African as well. Yes, African Caribbean. Yeah. And that's hugely important when we're talking about structures of power or authority or it's just everything, just the everythingness. I've given lots of talks about to groups about why is my curriculum white or various other campaigns started by students who are actually wanting to try to have additional representation and all sorts of things. And I just keep saying these numbers in an effort to sort of go, we've got a lot of work to do, like incredible amount of work to do. But we carry these numbers everywhere with us. The top number here, that's the number of race-based hate crimes newly released by the government. 42,930. That number is so much bigger than that. A total hounding, exactly. 827, the amount of lives lost due to police contact or police brutality since 2004, as released by IIR. Just in the UK. Just in the UK. Again, massively bigger than this, but it's still a hounding. These are the things that are on me right now. I mean, I'm carrying these, and I'm trying to figure out a way forward, and there might not be your houndings. You may have completely different sets of circumstances that you're working toward, or a vision that you're trying to imagine. But when I think about what the movement and activism in the diaspora means, what Black Lives Matter as a movement or as an energetic sort of collectivity can actually do, when I'm charged with thinking about the excitement coming out of our student unions right now and the just incredible amount of wealth, when I meet other folks and I interact with various different community groups and talk, you know, there's a lot out there. And I think right now we both are at a moment where we can do some really fantastic work, but I think we have to keep our eyes so open to the people who don't want that work to happen. And that is where I'm at today. And I will entertain lots of questions, I hope, as we sort of, because I don't have any magic answers. So don't ask me how to do it. I don't know. I don't. But what I know is that we have to, right? We have to find the spaces to start to think about this. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, I'm gonna jump right in after several train delays this morning. I'm like just happy to be here and be in this space. And already I can tell it's just going to be an incredible opportunity to have a conversation that in so many places is not happening and needs to take place. So located 20 minutes south of Ferguson, if you drive along Interstate 70 East in the heart of downtown St. Louis, Missouri, is the St. Louis City Justice Center, which is the paradoxical name for the city jail. A 5-minute walk due east, inching closer to the engulfing Mississippi River, takes you to the colossal office buildings of Peabody Energy, the largest private sector coal company in the world. Then, if you follow the city winds, situated 20 miles northwest, is the town where Michael Brown was born, lived, breathed, and died. These three places, Ferguson, the city jail, and Peabody Coal, give shape to a literal triangulation. There are places that determine who lives, who dies, and which lives matter. Before Michael Brown, there was this woman, LaVonda Kimball. In 2007, Kimball was arrested in St. Louis for failing to appear in court for 2 traffic violations. LaVonda was arrested at 2:30 in the afternoon, around the time her 12-year-old daughter would have been let out of school, and Kimball's boyfriend posted bail at 6:30, with the hope that LaVonda could be home before her daughter noticed that anything was awry. Ms. Kimball was anxious in jail, and after several hours waiting, she informed jail staff that she was struggling to breathe. Kimball, like many Black Missourians, had developed asthma at a young age. Growing up in a smog-laden St. Louis community, and she began desperately begging officials in this jail to give her medical care. By the time jail officials took action, it was too late. Kimball was pronounced dead when she arrived at the hospital. St. Louis jail officials would later claim that they administered medication to help her breathe, but toxicology reports came back making clear that this was not the case. They had let her die. Black Lives Matter, as a lens for analysis, allows us to see the multiple ways that world-ordering systems end Black life. That the Black Americans who die in prison and the Black Americans who die at the hands of the police are connected to the decimation of Black life elsewhere. That there is a broader regime, a global logic that profits off shortened Black lives. I was originally inspired to develop this talk because I was organizing in St. Louis weeks after Michael Brown was killed. I call St. Louis home. And I saw environmental activist groups like Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment join hands with the Organization for Black Struggle and the local chapter of the NAACP. I saw the ways that organizing, mobilizing, and linking issues could centralize exploitative racism as a central force working in the world today. My St. Louis friends who had been protesting how oil and coal companies were exploiting miners in West and Southern Africa realized that these companies were exploiting Black people in their own backyard. And my colleagues fighting for racial justice in the United States were made aware of all the ways that what we call capitalism is really global racial capitalism, a system taking resources, land, and labor from black lives all over the globe. So in this paper, I'm making one central claim, that Black Lives Matter is a framework. It is a way of seeing the world, the interconnected life-shortening harms to black lives, and I use global environmental degradation as just one such example, but there are a number, and I'd be really happy to discuss that on the panel. There's a lot of different hounds out there. If we consider that Black Lives Matter is a lens for analysis, we recognize that several things must be true. That the black part of Black Lives Matter means that black people all throughout the world, in different but in interrelated ways, are the ones being devalued and degenerated in global order. That two, the lives, part of Black Lives Matter, indicates who is having their lives strategically reduced. Using the framework of Max Weber's life chances and what other scholars call the distribution of life chances, it's clear that black livelihood is what is exploited most. And finally, that black lives matter. They matter and must be said to matter. This claim is to human dignity. And the movement, I would argue, has been so powerful because it rests on demands not just for policy changes. This could be a movement called Black Civil Rights Movement, Black Civil Rights Matter, but it's Black Lives Matter. It challenges the logic of racism. The Black Lives Matter framework makes clear that the reason that black lives are being killed is because a world steeped in white supremacy values black lives less. It values black lives less when it incarcerates them. It values black lives less when it ensures that they are it ensures that they are the ones experiencing global poverty. Black lives are the category of the people who receive the worst life chances. From birth, there are slow and fast ways that black people are vulnerable to life-shortening harm. The phrase Black Lives Matter means identifying the world-ordering systems that unjustly distribute life chances. Now, after Michael Brown died, the city of Ferguson commissioned a report to examine the deep inequalities that exist in the region that many believed were related to his premature death. And one of the most striking but underreported facets of this report was the statistic that compared the life expectancy of two St. Louis municipalities, almost entirely black Kinloch and almost entirely white Wildwood. People in Wildwood, the white suburb, lived 30 years longer. One measure of whose life mattered in this context was how long someone got to live. And the difference in this report, left explained simply by race, was vast. But this is too simple. Labeling race as an explanation as if race were real and not something made real, as scholars like Barbara and Karen Fields note, is problematic. The crude data that helps us recognize life chances shows that there are particular processes by which places in the world that have the worst life chances are also the places in the world that are predominantly black. And these processes of colonialism and racial capitalism, trickle from boroughs like Ferguson to the entire United States. Life expectancy rates in the United States are drastically defined by race. In 46 states, we see an incredible gap between how long white people live and how long black people live. White women living an average of almost a decade longer than black men. But there is a larger gap in the life expectancy, one that spans almost more than a decade. In states like South Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, and Alaska, it is indigenous native communities that have the shortest lives. And it's not just that these lives are shortened, it's that they're prematurely shortened due to hindered life quality. These are the states with the largest native communities decimated by white settler colonization of the United States. And it continues to bear repercussions. So we can take, for example, Alaska. As recently as the 1950s, the incentivized migration of white Americans to Alaska led to significant demographic changes prior to it becoming a state. Native Americans were 45% of the population in 1940, and by the time it became a state, it was reduced to 19%. And part of this regime, part of putting people on reservations, is that it creates inequalities that are rooted in colonization. So one of the statistics that we can look at that takes us beyond Ferguson is the infant mortality rates. Who dies at birth? This statistic from 2007, if read through a Black Lives Matter lens, makes the case that infant mortality rates are not only highest for black and native communities, they're strategically highest for black and native communities. They are part of a process of colonization, and the fact that most of these deaths are preventable deaths. They're due to the lack of care and access for the communities that were founded, the communities that this inequality was founded upon through the process of colonization. And so I mentioned this point to link the local to the global. We see that lives are shortened in a variety of ways in places like St. Louis. We see that lives are shortened in the United States broadly. But if we just start to describe the United States as a country built on white settler colonialism and enslaved labor, we recognize that at its core, colonialism is a life-shortening infrastructure of exploitative harm. If we put the United States in the context of colonialism, there's a different story to be told. And so Black Lives Matter provides us an anti-colonial framework. We're able to see the racialized harms circulating that hamper lives from birth. If we explore the same crude data that the Ferguson Commission did, looking broadly at life chances, then we find that the areas of the world populated by Black people are where we find people living the shortest lives. In Angola, the Central African Republic, Chad, the DRC, Somalia, Cote d'Ivoire, Mozambique, and Nigeria, we find the countries with the shortest average life expectancies, lives that are ended prematurely. These African countries, as I'm sure we all know, are those that have had labor and resources extracted for decades through lengthy colonial rule, which now have health, economic, and environmental threats that shorten Black lives. And so one question that we should be thinking is, if Black lives matter, do they matter when they're located in the global South? And we know the oft-told generalized story. These are poor countries. These are poor countries with a high mortality rate that arise from illness and from conflict. But what shortens Black people's lives most? What is our clearest indication of how Black Africans do not matter? Statistically, preventable waterborne diseases end the most lives in these countries. The World Health Organization is a report on diseases that can link environmental factors such as toxic drift, oil spills, contaminated non-hygienic water, coal emissions. Note that children in these 10 countries are 12 times more likely to die of diseases related to environmental circumstances than the children in the United States and in the United Kingdom. This image comes from Cote d'Ivoire, where the dumping of toxic waste by oil companies in 2013 and 2014 washed up on Atlantic shores. These environmental factors, paired with medicine that is made inaccessible to the majority of the world, ensures that thousands of lives are lost. Not just any lives. From birth, Black Africans are given worse life chances because countries like the United States and like the United Kingdom benefit from hoarding resources and leaving certain countries, certain people, and certain parts of the world susceptible to an early grave. It is not just that capital has flowed to wealthy white countries and moved to wealthy white neighborhoods in America and left Black countries and Black communities in poor health. It is that through racial capitalism, the world, the literal planet, is used as a mechanism for causing harm. This image is from 2010, where in the Zamfara state of northern Nigeria, over 400 children had their lives ended prematurely. When international health organizations arrived, toxicology reports found that high levels of lead in their blood was ruled to be the cause of their death. While mining for decades has been an industry in the region, the recent allowance of international corporations from Australia and the United Kingdom and general global market pressures have led to new mining and ore extraction processes. So when the value of gold shot up in the late 2000s, mining began at an unprecedented scale. And so while this type of labor always has had its complications, Doctors Without Borders, when investigating these children's death, noted that there was an unusually problematic concentration of lead, which they said did not surface in the region until the industry became widespread and profitable in capitalism. Reports that week noted that global competitors in other mining industries, such as Peabody Coal in the coal industry, were implicated in Nigerians using new and dangerous techniques. Thus, it's not only that Black lives are put in situations where they don't have access to care. They are also positioned where racial capitalism demands that they sacrifice years of their life in order for capital to be gained. This is what environmentalist Rob Nixon calls slow violence, wherein the poorest people on Earth, predominantly Black people, are left to the greatest risk of environmental degradation and dangerous harms over time. So for Black families who have lost loved ones due to the dangerous oil spills and the smog of mines, this violence is not slow, it is killing their families. Dangerous environmental extraction comes, most often, with the cost of Black lives. So if we were to consider the waterborne illnesses and toxic waste that filter to poor Black communities around the world, we recognize that at any stage of life, Black lives are allowed to suffer. This is what connects diseased water and the recent dragging of Black girls on the ground by school security guards in the United States. This is what connects the thousands of black people incarcerated in the United States and in the UK to broader systems of control and harm. If the police had not killed Michael Brown, his life still would have been at a greater risk because that is how racism pervades this earth. If lead poisoning had not killed 400 children in Nigeria, preventable diseases would have almost inevitably shortened their lives. We live in a world that strips labor, strips land, and strips time. A world that, in order for it to continue functioning as it is, must keep extracting something from black life. And this system takes us back to St. Louis, to the city jail, and to LaVonda Kimball. The LaVonda Kimball's death took place in the context of a city making money off of disregard for black life. The Ferguson Commission report highlighted many of the ways that police forces have abused black neighborhoods for decades. They have regularly imprisoned people for jaywalking and fined people hundreds of dollars for a single traffic violation. Remember, the reason LaVonda was in jail in the first place. This is how municipalities made their bottom line. This coming at the expense of years and years of black Americans' lives. Black Americans who are 3 times more likely to grow up poor than white Americans are caged behind bars. And so while LaVonda's daughter lost her mother forever, and thousands of black children lose their parents for decades at a time. That's the thing people don't talk about when we talk about jails and prison. People are losing members of their lives, losing members of their family for lifetimes, for years and years and years. This is racial exploitation status quo. And the city of St. Louis, the city of Ferguson, the report concluded, relied on these fines, relied on the jobs they didn't have to provide, relied on incarceration as a form of subjugation and lifelong discrimination, relied on having people they didn't have to treat like citizens. It relied on what funnels modern global capitalism, a portion of the population that is predominantly black from whom resources can be extracted and who are left vulnerable to life-shortening harms. And this is what Black Lives Matter shows us, that a movement that has emerged from the United States is intertwined with struggles and histories elsewhere. And it's one that has to acknowledge that life-shortening of black people everywhere take life-distributing systems. Now, I want to be clear, this paper was intentionally ambitious and inevitably involved oversimplifications and generalizations. I talked about the whole world, you know. But I do so to emphasize the ways that Black Lives Matter should inform our inquiry. Black Lives Matter provides us with a framework to make bold global and local claims. Global racial capitalism, like colonialism, extracts resources, land, labor, and time from particular places and particular people. It maldistributes life chances in racial ways. It hampers the water that certain people drink. It hinders the air that certain people breathe. This last graphic was included in the Ferguson Commission report, and it shows the rate of emergency room visits taken by African Americans in Ferguson for asthma, as opposed to white citizens. You see, this toxic smog that emerges from Peabody coal plant drifts across municipal lines to the poor black neighborhoods in Ferguson. The city was literally designed so that the harmful air floated to the poorest, blackest parts of town. Violent toxic air that Peabody Coal, the city of St. Louis, the United States, and the global north make millions off of flow towards where black life tries to exist. It's the same world-ordering systems that punish and demand that poor countries that rely on mining for their existence have to extract resources in more violent and more dangerous ways. The smog produced from racial capitalist extraction flows to where LaVonda Kimball was raised, acquired asthma, and years later would die. And it is this, how life chances are maldistributed, that Black Lives Matter helps us see. It helps identify the air we breathe and the water we drink as 2 elements of why we must say Black Lives Matter. It makes clear that we must say Black Lives Matter until the world recognizes that it is true. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to dive into the Q&A and I'm going to hand back to Champa, but just because we're slightly changing the program. We started late and we want to keep on schedule. So instead of having a 15-minute break between panels, we just encourage people if they need to step out, please do so, and we'll have 10, 15 minutes of questions now and then go right into the next panel. So if you do need to step out, please feel free. Otherwise, stay. Questions, please do keep questions short. We have mics here and in the middle.
Okay, so we're going to open out to questions now. I think, you know, what we've heard from the different speakers are the ways in which this movement provides a lens or framework in which we can begin to understand or try to make sense of deep structural inequalities at the nexus of race and poverty. So I think this is your space now in order to ask more questions. Is there anybody who has a question? We have a... Oh, I think they require you to come up to where the microphones are.
Oh, no, there's a mic.
There's one there, yeah. So if you have a question, if you don't mind making your way to where the volunteers are with the T-shirts holding the microphones.
Thanks. My name's Adrian. I live here now. I used to live in London. Now, I'm interested in this business of visibility and visibility and the other tension between when you've got a chip in your shoulder and when you're passive. The problem I have, and I want to ask about this, is we must also still, I mean, do you think, not blame the victim? I noticed that poster, which was used by the original anti-slavery thing with the slave with the chained hands. There could be a tendency, and I've observed this, to blame the victim again. It's not his fault. That was white power structures that used that image, of course. We need to be aware of that. But this business of blame, which can be apportioned or not, as the ruling ruling structure decides, we've got to really get around with that. I was just wondering what sort of ideas, no doubt they'll come out today, we've got towards dealing with it. Mm-hmm. One thing I would throw into the mix is the importance of media. Now, a little while ago, I got a bursary to go and work with on the environmental side, and what we did as scientists, and I'm a concerned scientist, is to actually get control of the media and then put our own stories forward. Mm. And that worked for that. Sorry, yeah, that's it.
That's okay. Are there other questions? So if we take 3 or 4 questions at a time, if we can keep the questions short so we can get through more, because there's only 15 minutes. Were there other questions?
Yes, hi. Hi. My question is for the panel at large, but more specifically also for the last paper. You all seem to be talking about the voice of different individuals and how do we get at the voice and how the narrative can be constructed. I'm curious though, because there seems to be some imbalance when it comes to looking at males versus females and how we are invoking statistical data that would allow us to kind of level the playing field and present a more nuanced view of what is happening not just to black males globally, but also to black females globally. And do you feel that in terms of having a global conversation, that type of data will then help us in the United States to really begin to ferret out whose black life matters? Yes. And that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Shall we take one more question? Is there another question? Otherwise, we can go straight to the panel. There's one here. You need to make your way to the microphone.
There's somebody with a microphone in the middle.
She has one here.
I'm so glad Joshua talked about colonialism within this context, because I think if we're talking about Black Lives Matter and how we go forward, we have to start with what the East India Company did in India and the Far East, and what the West India Company were doing in the 1600s in Africa and America. And I think we have, in order to develop a movement now, that analysis is crucial in some ways, because we have to link. In order for a Black Lives Matter movement here to develop, we have to talk about the Caribbean community, the Asian community, the refugee community, and that resistance over a long period of time and the lessons.
Okay, thank you. So if I believe the next session is going to be looking at gender dynamics in particular, but if we can touch on those questions around what it means to be both visible and invisible at the same time, how we understand the differentiated experiences of women and men, and the idea of different racial communities. So when we say Black Lives Matter, what does that mean in a globalized context where race plays out in very different ways? So I don't know, Karen, did you want to kick off? And then
sure. I'm not sure if this is... So hypervisibility and invisibility. I'll start with the blaming the victim part first, I think. because I think it's a tactic, and it should be thought of that way in terms of trying to evoke a certain type of response from the people actually engaged in trying to retaliate against it, right? But it's also rolled into some of the educational materials, so that it's not necessarily you blame the victim as much as you exalt certain people for their particular types of actions, right? But I think we've got a large community that have been working quite well and active about trying to change that kind of understanding and to package and prepare material that is not allowing, I'm thinking of things around enslaved persons and people's lives. And if you've ever read any historiographies from the mid-20th century, or let's say the early 20th century, they're offensive, essentially, of talking about enslavement. But I think when we're trying to talk about political action and how does blame work, I think it's worth noting that it's not necessarily just targeted necessarily at oppressive individuals against people who are resisting. You can have some blame working in communities where people are looking at certain types of activism as not legitimate and others that are. So there's blame works in really, really dangerous ways, right? And it's well worth, I think, under that. I think the hyper and invisibility is a tricky one when you work on issues of race and you carry markers of difference on you in some capacity, that you are marked. And but what I wanted to talk about more specifically was people's choice to not see you, and then the choice to see you, right? That is a strategy, and it needs to be understood as a strategic effort of others, and that both carries an incredible amount of weight to it, and it also makes you have to talk louder often to be heard, which often marks you more, right? And the kind of really weird event that you become louder, and then you're the loud, angry black person, or the brown person, or the thingy person. It doesn't matter, right? And that strategy is, we don't spend enough time talking about it. I think of what does it mean to have to deploy certain tactics to be heard within certain engagements, and how that feeds into other strategists from the other side. But it is a thing. I'll leave off the other parts for everybody else to talk about with the gender.
Joshua, I wonder if you want to come into that kind of data disaggregation between male and female experiences and oppressions that may exist within communities that are oppressed overall by deeper structural inequalities.
Definitely. Yeah, I thought that was an excellent question, and I think is particularly relevant in a number of contexts, but even this story that's coming out of the United States right now with the school official dragging this young girl across the ground and pushing her head, just brutalizing her in like a school context. And I think it makes the point that there are a whole number of statistics just in the US context where black girls and black women are disproportionately affected. They're the ones who are facing harm and facing brutalization, and there's a whole bunch of data, especially in prisons and jails, that I think pulls this out, and it's not often part of the conversation. And I think one of the things that there needs to be a lot of pushback on, I think, is when we see the government. So Obama started an initiative for black men and black boys, and you see a long letter coming from a whole number of organizations and scholars saying, like, where is something for black girls and black women? And I think time and time again, one of the things that even at a global scale we have to be really wary of is when is that data being pulled apart, and then for what means? So I think about the fact that George W. Bush didn't care about women's liberation until it was advantageous for him to go into the Middle East, right? That's the time that he cared about it. And so we have to think in meaningful ways about disaggregating that data, but I think even the LaVonda Kimball case, as opposed to the Michael Brown case, should give us some insight into the fact that there are different experiences and different ways in which that plays out. So I think it's really important to pull apart that data, and it just has to be done carefully. But I think the movement can often make the mistake of centralizing black men only, and that's just not the case. That's not who's facing harm only.
And Kitty, did you want to come on this idea, if we understand Black Lives Matter within a colonial context, so a different way of understanding that experience, what does that mean then for how we understand different experience of being racialized or at the nexus with poverty as well?
Okay, just say that for me.
So in terms of the idea that if we can understand Black Lives Matter in a global context as a colonial experience, then how do we understand racialized experiences? Because in a global context, they will be experienced differently in the Middle East and North Africa to the rest of the continent, to Asia, etc.
Yeah, I mean, as ever, when we just talk generically, we're forgetting that we're talking about black people in different spaces and different things are happening. So even though, for example, I'm kind of, and these are very different things I'm talking about, cheering that in terms of literature at the moment, in terms of more black women are visible more than black men, which is great. And so they're raising stories, more stories around black women. So I've just finished editing a series of an anthology of short stories. And I all of a sudden got to this point and I thought, oh my gosh, out of these 30 stories, there's only 30 writers, there's only 4 guys. And, you know, and it was kind of an imbalance. People say, I mean, that isn't a problem. I thought it was. Mm-hmm. You know, to me, that is a problem. We also have to think in terms of the visibility kind of things, in terms of, in several countries, I know in the Caribbean and in Africa, I've experienced that a lot of men work, but women can do, given to the women. What is that doing? That is making the men invisible in family structures. And we've got to be careful of that as well. So yes, it's great that women are having the work, but we've also got to see them, what does that do to the family? What does that do to men? What does that do to children when they're in those whole kind of situations? So again, it's another form of hounding. Yeah. You know, so there's so many different things. So, you know, and so for example, the job situation may not seem so visible, maybe so much in the West, but it's very, very visible in Africa. And you're finding that women are having to support, you know, support the men in quite a major way, you know. So the whole thing around feminism kind of comes up, and then women are kind of like slated for being feminists, and so they don't want to see themselves or call themselves as feminists. That's fine. They can be feminists, you know. And being feminist does not mean being a lesbian either. So all of these things, just, you know, it's so much stuff.
Okay, thank you. Were there any more questions? Oh, are we out of time? We are? Okay, well, if you could join us in thanking our panellists. I'm sure they're going to be available for the rest of the day as well.
We'll be around. Thank you.
And we're going to go right into the next panel. Could I invite Victoria and Stephanie and Althea up, please? Thank you.
Just say, everybody, we're trending on Twitter, so keep your tweets going, keep the hashtag Black Lives Matter UK going, and Notts TV has just turned up, so if anybody would be interviewed by Notts TV, please come and see us.